Hello, it is Saturday the 9th of November 2019 and we are in Schengen.
Schengen in Luxembourg, a small town with a big history. It's not just, as someone was suggesting on Facebook the other day, some kind of sauce for crispy Schengen chicken from the Chinese takeaway.
So you're watching Graham Hughes' PUBCAST. I'm today joined by my esteemed colleague, Adam Lee.
Yes, we had an interesting drive to Luxembourg.
Yeah.
Via Paris.
I thought you weren't going to mention that.
Well, I think it was worthy of a mention.
It turns out there's two Rue d'Iglesias.
There's actually three.
There's one in Luxembourg and one in France, in Paris.
And there's another one somewhere, but we didn't try to get to that one.
Did you not notice that all the road signs were saying Paris this way? Rather than Luxembourg.
To Luxembourg via Euro Disney.
We did get here about 1 o'clock in the morning though, so that was good eventually. So we're in Schengen today, and Schengen is, a lot of people don't even know that Schengen is a real place.
Yeah, it's
I knew that it was a real place, but it is. We are here now.
It is a real place.
We're in the Schengen Museum.
Schengen is alive.
Hi, Gordon.
And but Schengen was where they signed, I've got it here, the Schengen Agreement on June the 14th, 1985. It was one of the major steps towards a unified Europe, the abolishment of inner European border controls between the signatory countries. It's considered the birthplace of a borderless Europe, travelling without border formalities from one country to another, be it either by foot, by bike or by car. Now what we can tell you is that over there is the Moselle River. On the other side of that river is Germany, and down that way is France. But the actual border is right in the middle of the river. So they actually signed the treaty.
We could wade.
Have you seen how deep that is and how far
So
it's running?
are they on a boat?
They actually signed it on board a cruise ship, MS Princess Marie Astrid. And it was political representatives of Luxembourg, Belgium, the Netherlands, France and Germany were the first signatories to the Schengen Agreement.
So Schengen is basically an area in which you are free to move and work and play and live,
fall in love and retire
without having to stop and ask permission of a man in a uniform.
There's only 2 countries in the EU that aren't in the Schengen Agreement.
No, that's not true. There's 4, at least. No, there's 5. Cyprus isn't in it. Bulgaria isn't in it.
But
Romania's not in it. Ireland's not in it, and the UK's not in it.
But Cyprus and I think only the UK and Ireland are the only countries that don't follow the spirit of the Schengen Agreement. I think Cyprus and Croatia are already sort of following the spirit of it, ready to sign the agreement.
Okay, but the flag of Cyprus and the flag of, because there's a lot of flags outside, and all the flags of the Schengen countries. It doesn't include Croatia yet, but it's a bit awkward for Croatia because Croatia is actually split in 2 by a little bit of land called Neum, I think it is, which is part of Bosnia, which allows Bosnia access to the sea.
Right, yeah.
And so if you go down to Dubrovnik, you actually have to drive, if you're coming down from Split to Dubrovnik, and on the coast, the Adriatic coast, you actually have to stop at border controls and leave the EU. And then a few metres down the road, you then rejoin the EU.
Stop and re-enter.
Yeah, it's a bit crazy. But yeah, so hopefully Bosnia and Herzegovina will join the EU at some point, and then it will just render that border obsolete.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a pain actually, since I was in Croatia before it joined the EU, and I've been there after it joined the EU, and since it joined the EU it's been more difficult to get from one end of the country to the other because of that.
Yeah, which is
it's not quite the way we wanted things to go.
It's a little bit mad really, isn't it?
There you go.
So we've just been down here, and quite interestingly, they've got 2 sections of the Berlin Wall, and Graham did a little bit of filming there. I don't know whether he's going to put this on YouTube, because today is 30 years since the Berlin Wall fell. I remember watching this on the television and being astounded by it, really. And it's quite fitting that
How old were you when it came down?
16, yeah.
So I was 10. I was just a little baby Graham, little tiny Graham. But did you understand what was going on at the time?
I'd got a fairly good idea by then, because I'd sort of left school, and I'd always sort of followed politics a little bit at school, and it's like the famous Queen song, for those who grew up in the shadow of the mushroom cloud. It was always this bit of a threat that the Russians were going to start lobbing nuclear weapons at us, and we were just we lived not far from RAF Finningley, and we used to get all the aircraft for the Finningley Air Show sort of fly down towards Finningley for the fly pasts down the bottom of our house, sort of over the fields at the bottom of our house, so they were on their approaches, so they were really quite low, and so we were really in the target zone there. But the Russians had got that much nuclear hardware that they could have wiped out NATO like 2 or 3 times over.
I don't think people really either, they just don't remember what it was like, or a lot of the younger generation can't remember because they weren't born,
but it's not.
But as a child of the 80s, so I was born in 79, so my formative years were all in the 80s, and not only did we have stuff like Threads, which I remember watching, When the Wind Blows, which I very vividly remember watching, When the Wind Blows, absolutely terrifying. Red Dawn with young Patrick Swayze, I think, was it?
Yeah,
Red
was
Dawn?
it? Yeah.
And I specifically remember, must have been about 7 or something. My brother decided he was going to dig, after watching one of these films, he decided he was going to dig a nuclear fallout shelter in the back of our back garden while my mum and dad were in the house. So we went down the bottom of the garden, we started digging holes. And after like hours and hours and making a hole about this deep, I say, what good is this going to be? Because he said, but if you're in a fallout shelter, you'll survive a 1 megaton blast going off a mile away. I said, oh, that's great. How many megatons is one of these Soviet bombs they've got? He's like, oh, it's about 100.
So what's the point?
I just put the shovel down, went back in and had some Ribena.
And your dad came out and said, who's been digging holes in my garden?
But you've got that threat, that overriding threat of not just you, not just your family, but your entire city being wiped out in a flash.
Blink of an eye,
was absolutely terrifying, an existential threat.
Yeah.
And we grew up with that, and now people are saying we shouldn't talk about the environment because it upsets people and makes them scared, and you're like...
But, 3/4 of Norfolk and London are going to be underwater if we don't do something about it. But
there was very little I could do about the Cold War as a child.
No.
But I can do something about climate change. I can actually change the way I live, eat less meat, drive an environmentally friendly car, use less energy, be more
public
mindful.
Transport more, yeah.
There's very few people in the world who could say they've used more different forms of public transport than me, but and all that kind of stuff. There's stuff that we can do. But it's worth remembering, going back to the fall of the Berlin Wall 30 years ago, it wasn't tanks that did that. It wasn't guns, and it wasn't nuclear bombs. It was people power.
And it was literally a domino effect. And the thing is, right, what gets me is all these mad, rabid Brexit voting loons. We're talking
tell us what you really think.
Well, I'm trying to be polite in here. I don't want to swear. There's a child
very quiet.
over there.
It's a very quiet little cafe. I've told Adam not to boom like his usual, why I'm blessed. I'm just jealous because usually I've got the loudest voice.
The gobshite. Anyway, so what was I talking about? You interrupted me again.
I just mentioned about the Berlin Wall and what the people who voted Brexit don't realise.
Oh, right. So the people were talking about a domino effect of if the UK leaves. These idiots who think the EU is going to collapse and it's going to be a domino effect. That the UK will leave and Ireland will leave and then France will leave and all these countries are going to leave after we've led the charge, right? The only time the domino effect has worked has been in the fall of communism. If anything, Brexit has made the European Union stronger and drawn people together.
Have you seen the cartoon with the dominoes and the first one's Britain and all the others, and it's fallen the wrong way?
Yeah. And that's exactly what it is. But there was a domino effect that led to the Berlin Wall falling because, those were momentous times. If today's the 9th of November. Remember the 9th of November. But if today is the 9th of November, in less than 2 months' time from now, it will be the 30th anniversary of one of Europe's most notorious dictators and his wife getting executed. Christmas Day in 1989 with his wife, and it was a summary execution.
I mean, he was horrific.
He was absolutely. And she was bonkers, wasn't she? I mean, she was this.
Yeah. Not that I condone the death penalty. I really don't.
No,
but I mean, I'm glad that they saw justice, but I wish it wasn't that kind of justice.
No.
But it makes me very unhappy to know that Pol Pot and Idi Amin both died old men.
In relative comfort under house arrest, wasn't it, or something?
Well, Idi Amin fled to Saudi Arabia. He was living in a palace. This is a guy who murdered hundreds of thousands of his own people. He had disabled people put to death for being disabled. I mean, the guy got rid of, he forced the entire Indian population of Uganda out overnight. It's like everyone who's Indian had to leave or face death. Yeah. It was just horrific. Yeah. And Mugabe, he died of old age as well. Pretty much the same thing to white farmers working in Zimbabwe, on the grounds that they own too much land, which I always find really weird. It's not like people need or want land. They want a house that's big enough for them to live in,
and it's
comfortable and warm, they want enough food. And do you know what? A good way of making it so that people are comfortable: don't have hyperinflation by printing out banknotes, so you end up with $50 trillion notes.
Yeah, I've actually got a 10 billion Zimbabwe dollar banknote, you know.
I'm a Zimbabwe dollar billionaire as well. Yeah. I think I'm a trillionaire, actually. I think I got 50 trillion. It was like a fiver. I thought, I'll get that.
I'll have that. Yeah.
I'll have that.
So, I mean, it was momentous times. I mean, 1985, the Schengen Treaty had been signed just down the way here.
1985 and Relax by Frankie Goes to Hollywood has just come on the stereo.
Relax.
The tune of the 1980s.
That was a masterstroke by them. Liverpool, managed to get it banned.
Liverpool banned, by the way. I don't mean they were banned in Liverpool, I mean they're from Liverpool.
Yeah, but managed to get your song banned by Radio 1 and it'll get straight to number 1.
Yeah. I mean, Sex Pistols did that, didn't they?
I mean, there's two ways to make money in music fast. Get a song banned by the BBC or release a hit for Christmas. Because like if you release a Christmas hit, the playing Relax don't do it.
I know, that's what I just said. That's why
I didn't realise. I didn't realise. I thought it was just completely random.
What a marvellous coincidence.
Wow, that's amazing. So, but yeah, if you release a Christmas song, every year all the royalties from it globally earns you about 250,000 quid.
Yeah, but only if it's a decent Christmas song. And the last decent Christmas song was actually All I Want for Christmas Is You by Mariah Carey, which came out in about 1994, I think. There hasn't been a decent Christmas song since then. We just stopped making them.
Well, yeah.
It's like nice buildings after the war. We just stopped making them.
Yeah.
We had a
discussion about architecture in the car yesterday, coming from Paris.
So let's go back to the Berlin Wall.
The Berlin Wall.
So it's quite interesting because the Berlin Wall, a lot of people see it as the end of the Cold War. Obviously, things rattled on for a few months, years afterwards, but eventually, it signified the beginning of the end of the Cold War, effectively. Yeah. But it was also the end of something else. It was the official end of World War II.
Yeah, it was the following year, I think, in 1990. The final treaties were signed for the end of the Second World War because it was all based on the reunification of Germany. Yeah. And it took a little while for the two countries to be reunified, but that certainly did happen. And so, and all these people who talk about, we won the war and all that kind of stuff, well, we didn't. It was a joint effort between many countries.
We meaning the forces of good.
But people talk about it, and it's like, well, the war did officially end with VE Day for the war in Europe and VJ Day for the war in the Far East. But, treaties were getting signed for years afterwards and reparations been paid and things like that for years.
We were still paying back the Americans
until about
2006.
2006, yeah. It's... It was significant in a number of ways, really. The fall of the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and David Hasselhoff was there singing, and
Well, people, historians, political commentators at the time were talking about the end of history, because this was going to be it. This was going to be peace and prosperity forever onwards. But obviously, humans aren't that.
we're not that smart.
Not that smart. And in the same way that, I don't know, just people's reactions to situations, the exact same situations, can be very different. In the same way that two children who have exactly the same upbringing can be very different and react in situations very differently. People just do. And what I guess a politician's job, what government's job is to protect people.
Yeah.
It's to protect people from illness, from stupidity, from themselves if necessary, to protect them from
foreign aggressive powers.
To protect them from murderers and rapists and people who want to steal their stuff.
Yeah.
That's their job. What isn't their job is to cow down to any crazy demands that the people put on them. Whether it's a significant minority or even a majority of the people want, because we've got things like the death penalty, which exists in about 40 countries still have the death penalty. Japan still has the death penalty, which is embarrassing for Japan. In Europe, just a few years ago, we had the first year when no one was put to death in the entire continent of Europe.
Really?
Yeah, because Russia suspended the death penalty, and no one was killed in Belarus. Belarus still has the death penalty.
Right, okay.
But if we had a referendum tomorrow on bringing back the death penalty in the United Kingdom...
What terrifies me is the amount of people who'd vote for it.
Yeah. Well, actually, if we had a referendum and it was, say, a week after a child had been murdered, it would almost certainly be brought back.
Yeah.
And the reality is, murder's horrific, but the vast majority of murderers didn't set out like some serial killer to, plot the death of somebody. It's usually an escalation of an argument. Yeah. It's usually someone who is known to you that does it.
Well, yeah.
And I don't want to diminish the horrific nature of murder, but I'm going to say there's about 600 people a year are killed in the United Kingdom by murderers. In globally significant sort of death rate, we live in a very, very safe country.
Society.
In a safe continent. Yeah. And the thing with the death penalty, it not only costs more than just keeping people alive because of the court fees and things. People don't go back to court year after year if they've been put in a life imprisonment. And you know what? I'm all for prison reform. I feel like if it's a non-violent drugs offence, I don't even see why that should go to jail. And people who are in jail, I think there should be a thing about, with the way good behaviour, you get out for half, you go on parole after half your sentence. So if you're sentenced for 10 years, after 5 years you're eligible for parole. I mean, if you're a dick, you might stay in jail
for a bit longer.
For 10 years. But as long as you keep your head down, tick all the boxes, meet with your parole officer every week or whenever it is, you can get out half your time. Well, yeah, that's nice, but I think it should be more than that. I feel like you should be encouraged to use your time in prison constructively. Yeah. And so if you apply yourself and get a qualification or learn a skill, that should be taken into account.
Yeah, it should. Because then you're going to actually actively start paying back into society.
Well, you're more likely to get a job. Yeah. Less likely to just go straight back into crime because there's literally nothing else you know to do. Yeah. Slightly getting off topic here, but the Berlin Wall was absolutely monumental in world history. Yeah. And it was presumed that okay, we won. We won. I mean, the forces of good. The forces that didn't want to build walls, that didn't want to keep people in cages, that didn't want to put people to death and split up families and say, look...
And send people to the gulag.
Yeah, where children are grassing on their parents, unknowingly to send them off to a gulag or death. We didn't want that anymore.
But what's staggering is the amount of walls that are now springing up around Europe. And it's all down to this so-called migration crisis. And the only people that are benefiting from this are the arms manufacturers, like Airbus, like Thales and all this kind of stuff, who they're making pots of money because governments are spending bucket loads of money putting up these anti-migrant fences, rather than tackling the issues that's causing the migration crisis.
Yeah. And one of the mad things is that the vast majority of illegal immigrants in any given country given developed nation arrived on the plane and overstayed their visa,
Yeah.
or overstayed their entry stamp.
Do you know who the biggest number of, which nation does the biggest number of illegal immigrants come from in Australia?
I would say it was Britain.
It's Britain.
Is it?
Yeah, because it's people staying after their 3-month electronic travel authority has expired.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, Australia's a really good example of this. The hysteria that was whipped up around just after the turn of the millennium about the boat people who were coming
They've had
from
it for
Indonesia.
years. They've had it before the millennium because of the Vietnamese boat people.
Yeah, but this was the wave that were coming from Afghanistan and
Oh,
Iraq.
yeah.
And these people had made their way across the entire continent of Asia, got as far as Indonesia, and were travelling with their children. People say, oh, the bogus asylum seekers. You're like, do you know how you tell if they're not bogus? They're a woman. They have children with them. Because you just don't do that. You just do not do that. You don't leave your home unless you think your children and yourself are going to be killed.
In danger.
I want a slightly better job. Leave all your friends and family behind. Leave everything you know and your language and your security. People just don't do that.
No.
for the warm welcoming arms of Australia. But I remember back at the time, which is the reason why I say about the boat people in the early 2000s, there was a very notorious picture that was put on the front cover of all the newspapers of the Australian Navy rescued all these people who were coming across on the boat, and the boat started sinking, and the Navy was there, and they got over, and there's a picture, a very famous picture of this Royal Navy woman in the water holding onto a child, swimming to get the child to safety. And what the story in the newspapers was that the migrants were throwing their children overboard to get them picked up by the Coast Guard or by the Navy.
Probably the Murdoch-owned press, I would
An absolute lie, a flat-out lie. The boat was sinking.
Yeah.
But that sparked, in the public imagination, Australia, this huge, oh my God, they're so disgusting, they'll throw their own children into the sea.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so
what on earth is going through the minds of these editors, these glorified hacks, who can think that kind of thing up?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the big precursors to the situation we're in today with Brexit and Trump and everything has been the press.
Yeah.
Our journalists have let us down massively for the sake of sensationalism, money, political agenda of the owners of their newspapers or TV channels.
Yeah.
It's an absolute disgrace.
Yeah.
But going back to the Australian thing, I remember at the time there was a cartoon and it was all these Australians on the beach, white Australians with their board shorts on, placards, boat people go home, Australia's full, immigrants not welcome, and in the background are two Aboriginals, and one saying to the other, oh, wish we thought of that.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a friend from Canada who's moaning about the immigrants coming over to Vancouver, and he said, I don't mind them coming over, but you know they should at least learn the language. And I said, oh, how's your Inuit?
Yeah.
Hey, my American friends, how's your Navajo?
Yeah, exactly.
And coming from British English-speaking people, I think that is incredibly hypocritical because we are renowned for not learning other languages.
The language of the country that we're in, yeah. But it's like one of those things as well. Have you ever noticed how someone moves to the UK and they're considered an immigrant? Even if it's a doctor. They've studied in India, they've done all the relevant exams to come to the UK, and they turn around and someone said, oh, where are you from originally? Oh, I'm from India. And then they turn around and say, oh, you're an immigrant. But when a Brit moves to Spain to retire, they say, I'm an expat. And it really makes my blood boil, because no, you're not. You're an immigrant.
It doesn't count when I do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of people don't seem to get the fact that the end of freedom of movement, and we're here today in Schengen. Big celebration of freedom of movement. They don't understand that we're going to lose it too.
Yeah. I mean, people voted for this who've been living retired in Spain for 10 years. Because if you've lived outside the UK for more than 15 years, you can no longer vote in UK referendums or elections. But people have been retired for 10 years living in Spain and say, I'm going to vote to end freedom of movement. I'm going to vote for Brexit because I want to stop the immigrants coming in. And they're a bloody immigrant themselves. I'm like, what on earth? Talk about turkeys voting for Christmas.
Wasn't there a movie called Hear No Evil, See No Evil, or See No Evil, Hear No Evil? With
Richard Pryor.
And Gene
Wilder.
Gene Hackman. But there's a point in it where he plays... Richard Pryor plays a black. I mean, he plays a blind guy.
Yeah.
Doesn't know he's black.
Yeah.
So it's great. Like, I think he's taking the piss, but he's like, I'm black. Why did my mother tell me? But it's that level of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. Exactly.
I hate these people who breathe oxygen. And you're like, you do know that you breathe. No, that's different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hate people who eat food.
Yeah. Drink water. It's just bizarre, isn't it? I'm an expat, so I'm going to vote. And talk about pulling up the ladder from your kids and your grandkids,
The last podcast we talked about was the Swiss cheese model. And it also works the other way. And I was thinking about the fall of the Soviet Union, which came about through a lot of things all going wrong kind of at the same time.
For the Soviet Union.
At the time, at the end of the 80s, the Soviet Union, as far as I'm aware, feel free, like we always say, to correct us in the comments.
I'm sure there'll be a few.
Sure you will. The Soviet Union had a bigger nuclear arsenal than America. It had a bigger army, had a bigger navy, bigger air force, I think.
Yeah. Because it was...
But it couldn't feed itself.
Yeah, there was famous footage on the BBC, I remember in the 80s, of Russian housewives queuing for bread. They'd heard that a bakery had got some bread, and it's like, seriously. And I remember watching this as a child, and I know someone who was a fully paid up member of the British Communist Party, and they came over they went over to Eastern Bloc countries with the British Communist Party a couple of times, and he said, in the Soviet Union, like in Moscow, you knew you were getting followed, right? But he said what made him stop being a communist, it wasn't even the shortages of food, because they were getting presented all this good gear in Moscow.
Yeah. If you were part of the party,
but they were putting on a good.
They
were putting on a good impression for their esteemed guests from the British Communist Party. But he tore up his British Communist Party membership card, after he'd visited East Germany, and he said it wasn't because of the lack of food. It wasn't because they were being followed. They knew they were being followed.
Yeah.
It was because the people who were following them were being followed.
Yeah.
The Stasi were following the Stasi, following them, and it was just so oppressive. But they were spending all this money on this kind of thing, but couldn't afford milk.
I was talking to some young Germans. Well, I say young Germans, the same age as me, but back then we were young, and they grew up in East Germany. And one of the things that they said to me, which I found surprising, is that they found a lot of comfort in the fact that there was no choice. Though they were told what to think. To think for themselves.
Yeah.
And there's a weird comfort in that.
Yeah.
And there's an expression that I've heard in Germany of a few people now, is of a particular set of people in East Germany for whom the wall came down in reality, but the wall is still there in their minds.
Yes. Yeah.
They're still East German.
Yeah.
And there's a few quirks and with the way they think. And obviously, a lot of this is to do with environmental factors growing up, things like that.
Yeah.
But I think the neatest parallel with Brexit is the people who want Brexit, nearly all of them, to a man that I've spoken to, they're still fighting the Second World War.
Yeah.
In their head. They're like that crazy Japanese guy who was in the jungle in Thailand or somewhere. No, Papua New Guinea.
Papua New Guinea, somewhere.
He was in Papua New Guinea, and he was fighting until like the 70s.
Yeah.
Because he didn't believe that the war was over.
In fact, he
thought it was a trick.
Didn't someone from the Japanese royal family actually have to go and say to him, the war is ended?
The war ended 30 years ago, mate. Just slap across that. Stop killing people.
Stop trying to be at war. Yeah. You can come home.
He was that focused on the fact that the war was still going, and that is prevalent.
Brexit. But when you say, people have got this comfort from East Germany, and they said they miss the comfort of being told what to think. Yeah. We've got that with the Daily Mail. We've got that. I mean, under that odious, jumped up, pompous, overpaid hack, Dacre, who was the editor, I remember there was sensationalising the journey of a guy from Somalia or something, and he'd been...
Was it Mo Farah?
No.
Oh. Because he was from Somalia.
But this guy
he
was...
won gold medals with Britain.
And here's the other thing. The Daily Mail called him an illegal immigrant. You're not an illegal immigrant until your case has been processed and you don't get a visa. You're an asylum seeker. So let's get the legalities right, okay? And don't give me this, it's the country of the first landing and blah, blah, blah. People want to go to different countries for different reasons. But this guy was in the back of a lorry, he stowed away on a ferry, got into the UK, got his asylum visa, and the headline on the Daily Hile was the final insult in big black letters. He now wants a job. He wants a job and to stop paying into the system.
Yeah, start paying tax.
Why is that an insult? I know plenty of British people who've never had a job.
There's of the people of the ilk of, if you love the EU so much, why don't you live there? And you're like,
we
do. And if you take us out, then you've also taken away our ability to just go and live there
in the EU. So
you bastards.
Yeah,
but one of the things that I will say about the EU, and it's one of the inherent problems, is that it does have to respect the sovereignty of each individual state. And even though every member of the EU and every member of the UN has signed up to the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which was drawn up in the 1940s after the Second World War, and it states very clearly that the members of the UN will give accommodation to refugees from war, famine, poverty, whatever
those genuine rules are.
We will endeavour to be fair. And one of the things that
the reason that came up was because nobody wanted the persecution of an entire religious group, because the British were as complicit in allowing the Jews of Europe to not escape as the Germans. The Germans...
they weren't as complicit as the Germans. I mean, that was going a bit far. The
Germans
murdered them.
I said not in murdering them, I said in not allowing them to escape.
Oh, yeah.
Because the British... I was very careful.
Yeah?
I was very careful what I said there. The British didn't allow them to come here.
To come to Britain.
In Luxembourg. We're in Luxembourg. But they didn't want the Jews of Europe to come to the UK. So they were as complicit as not allowing them to escape as the Germans were.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there.
You know, and I think it was towards the end of the war, there was the guy from Sweden who organised all those buses, wasn't there, to take children to Sweden.
There was a British guy who brought a lot of children.
Oh, there was, yeah.
Transport.
The kinder transport, yeah, sorry.
Saved hundreds of children.
Yeah.
Who would have otherwise been
gassed,
slaughtered like Anne Frank.
Yeah. And, you know,
6 million other unfortunate Jews. Plus, so 6 million Jews, plus gypsies, homosexuals,
intellectuals.
Communists, socialists, political dissidents.
Have you heard of the Black Book? Hitler had a book drawn up of British people that were going to be, after if Germany had invaded the UK and won, he'd got this book of people who were to be summarily executed. It was like people like Noel Coward, Winston Churchill, obviously, intellectuals, and but it was a bit out of date. I mean, people when it came to light said, oh, they died 10 years before the war and stuff like that. But I mean, they were systematic about it.
Yeah.
You know?
When we were talking yesterday about the Swiss cheese model, just to go back to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Soviet Empire, the sort of the interesting thing is, again, overlapping with some of the stuff that we discussed in the Swiss cheese model, pertaining to 9/11. You had for the fall of the Soviet Empire at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, several things had to happen. Vietnam had to happen because America was riding high after Korea, because it had basically done its objective. We had this communist north that was separated from the liberal democratic south.
Yep.
And they were hoping to do the same thing with Vietnam. They failed miserably, and Saigon fell and became Ho Chi Minh City, that America lost its bloodlust at that point. It decided it didn't really want to get involved in any more wars. Similarly to the way it did more recently after Iraq.
Yeah.
And so instead of actually actively getting involved in a war with the whole invasion of Afghanistan to kick the Soviets out, first of all, there was a boycott of the Olympics that were held.
The Moscow Olympics.
They were boycotted by
in
America
1980,
and other countries because of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And then we had the Charlie Wilson's War stuff where they were supplying the Mujahideen with weapons, ammunition, rocket-propelled grenades.
Via Israel and Pakistan.
Via Israel and Pakistan, which always cracks me up.
Yeah.
And so that led to a huge defeat of the Soviets in Afghanistan. And that took a huge mental toll on the national psyche of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Because you had these soldiers coming home and being spat at on the underground in Moscow, who had gone through hell, seen their friends slaughtered in front of them for what they could see as no reason.
Yeah.
Then you also had another hole in the cheese, if you want to look at it this way. It's Mikhail Gorbachev, the guy who brought in Glasnost and Perestroika, openness. This is the idea that we should allow a bit more democracy, effectively, let people have a bit of a say. You also had the fact that we touched on earlier about the lack of food, but this was compounded by the system of communism and an inherent flaw in the Communist Manifesto as envisaged by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. They, Karl Engels, that was their son they had together. Communism, a lot of people say, it's a good idea on paper, but it doesn't work in reality. It's actually not a really good idea on paper because the economic model relies on people not being greedy little shits. Now, the capitalist model accommodates for people being greedy little shits and hopefully puts some barriers on their greed, put some taxes on their profits. So then we can have hospitals and schools and public transport and all the things that we enjoy as a society.
In effect, trickle down economics. In a way.
I hate that expression.
But in a way, anyway.
But yeah, effectively, the capitalism has a catchment for greed. Supposedly, doesn't always work. Obviously, I'm sure there's going to be people in the comments commenting that. But communism inherently has a huge problem with the way it handles the economy because of this problem with greed. And so you had a system in Russia, an underground black market, which was called BAT, I think, BAT.
Yeah.
And what it was all these different factory owners had a quota of lead, iron, coal, whatever they used to have. And they used to secretly pay something that they had to another factory to bring a shipload of what they had made over to them for when the inspectors turned up. So they went, oh yeah, you've made it off, great. And then that'll get shipped off somewhere else. So no one, because everyone was lying. Everyone was lying about how much of this stuff they had made, getting the quota, achieving the next 5-year plan or whatever it was. And so everyone was just fibbing because they didn't want to take responsibility because... So you had these inherent problems with the system. So they're your systematic problems. Like in Piper Alpha, there's actually systematic problems. Then you had human error to a point where the Berlin Wall actually came down because of a miscommunication. Do you hear about this?
Yes,
the guy who was in charge basically didn't get the order correctly, and he thought they said open the wall when he didn't say that. They said the opposite. I think shoot them all.
Shoot them all. Yeah.
What was that? Open the wall? No, shoot them all. Open the wall. Okay, and then
they opened the gate.
Obviously in German. But yeah. So and the wall came down. If one of those things
hadn't
happened, maybe the wall would have come down. Maybe that was the march of history. But it wouldn't have been till maybe.
But there was
years later.
They started to allow, before the Berlin Wall came down, they started to allow East Germans access to West Germany by going through like Hungary, Austria, and into West Germany, didn't they? And for some reason, I mean, it was only a matter of days or weeks before the Berlin Wall came down, and it's like, well, you can go round.
Well, that's the same thing for...
Oh, okay. Then they went home.
Well, if you're a Turk living in northern Cyprus, here's fun for you. You want to travel to the other side of your island.
Right.
You have to go on the ferry or fly back to Turkey, then to Greece, get a visa, and then come from Greece to get into
Cyprus.
So to get to the other half of Nicosia, or Lefkosa. that's the way you got to do it. And I'm laughing, but I'm crying inside because it's such a shame to see a country split into
Nicosia's still a divided city like Berlin was. And you've got places like where my Uncle Tom did his national service, Famagusta, which is just a ghost town now. Because of
What's interesting is if you go to Berlin and visit it, the east side of the city is full of these beautiful palaces and buildings that have been restored lovingly, brick by brick, stone by stone, window by window. They've been put back, whereas the west side is full of concrete monstrosities. Because in the 60s, the Americans were trying to prop up the west so that anyone looking over the wall, before the wall was built,
looking over the border.
Isn't the West amazing? It has shopping malls and it has cinemas and it has this beautiful concrete pillar that used to be where the cathedral was that looks like a big concrete turd on its end. Yay, concrete. I'm sorry, I hate concrete. I should really stress how much I hate concrete.
It's interesting. We're going to do a podcast about architecture one day.
But one of the other buildings that is just incredible that if you want to go and see a building restored is the Dresden Cathedral, which was completely levelled in the war, completely levelled. And they rebuilt it brick by brick in the 90s, and where they couldn't find the correct piece because it had been stolen to make someone's garden wall or something, they manufactured a new piece. So it's got a kind of mottled effect to it, and it's really fascinating, and they rebuilt it exactly as it was. So we still have the technology to build beautiful old style buildings, but we just don't because concrete's cheap and easy.
But it's interesting you talk about the propaganda of the East versus the West in Berlin at the time, right? Because they've got these really interesting ways of smuggling people across the border. I was working in China for a while, and I was working in a place called Dalian, which is up near the North Korean border. So I managed to get a tour to Dandong, right? And you've got the Yalu River, and that's the border of North Korea and the People's Republic of China. And they've got these two bridges that go, they had two bridges. They've got one bridge that goes across between North Korea and the People's Republic of China. And you've got what they call the Yalu River Friendship Bridge, which half of it is still missing because it was bombed by the Americans in the Korean War. And the North Koreans won't rebuild their side, because to rebuild it would admit that it was destroyed. It's a weird logic, but anyway.
It's just like Boris Johnson's garden bridge. So it just exists in your mind.
They take you out on this boat onto the Yalu River and they say, right, over there, that's North Korea. And you can see all these North Korean guard posts, and the guards every few minutes they'd march across, and it was perishingly cold. And what happens is you then get to a bit further along the river, and you're sort of looking back at Dandong, which is this sprawling metropolis. But you look at the North Korean side, and there's a building, and then in the distance you can see a bit of a hoop, like a roller coaster, and then you can see a Ferris wheel. There's no pods on the Ferris wheel. It's all propaganda, and they're saying, isn't it great in North Korea? There's not a candle in the windows at night. It's pitch black.
Well, I've been to the DMZ on the other border with
South Korea.
And it was like, they got a flag, so we put up a flag that was slightly bigger, and then they put up an even bigger flag, and it was like then our side put up a bigger flag, and it was just like this flag war, and the biggest flag in the world, I think, is in North Korea, because it's just over the. Look at our amazing.
We've got this amazing flag. We've got this amazing flag factory.
But it's sad that the North Korean model of let's build a wall and make sure no one leaves. If they try to leave, we'll kill them. Is the mentality of a lot of people in the United Kingdom right now. People who want Brexit.
We don't want outsiders in, and we don't want the insiders to get out.
I know a lot of people have a go at me for saying, not all leavers are idiots, and I'm like, okay, I'm sure there's some that are very smart. Where are they hiding?
Show us. Get them on these videos with us,
Get them to comment on our videos, because all the comments we get
are just generally abuse.
No.
Oh, no, generally
generally people who like
people
us.
on our side.
Correcting our mistakes. But they're on our side. They're part of our discussion. They're part of the PUBCAST. Thanks, guys.
But we get a lot of people who disagree with us, and they're just abusive.
Yeah.
And you know that they've got no argument when all they can say is, "Oh, he's a ginger scouse and I'm a fat bastard." It's...
But I do I do have to say that I sometimes just succumb to the whole thing. If someone insults me, my natural base human instinct is to insult them worse, insult them back, but worse.
Yeah.
Usually involving something about their mum.
Anyway, right. So we're in 2019, and we're here where a significant part of the European project, the European Peace Project, was started in 1985. Peace was still, it was
a pipe dream back then, wasn't it?
We were at relative peace, but there was always this insecurity, and and then
relative peace in 1985. Though I mean, this was the time of the rhetoric between Reagan
and drop off,
and drop off,
and
yeah,
but.
This is
it was still relative peace. I mean, nobody had taken any pot shots at each other, any of these big pot shots, like the Second World War.
Yeah.
The European Union, the start of it with the Treaty of Rome was to prevent bloodshed on the scale that we'd had in Europe for the previous first half of the century, and the quality and standard of life started to go up because European countries were working together to implement things like, catalytic converters on cars, which remove toxins from the atmosphere to bring in lead-free petrol or unleaded petrol. And European governments were working together to make the standard of life for everyone in Europe better, as per what they wanted in the Treaty of Rome, and to make things easier.
If you manufacture a product, you can just sell it in all the countries.
Not even if you're a manufacturer. I mean, we've driven to Luxembourg, and we got off the ferry in France and had to drive through France and into Luxembourg. But
a bit more fancy than we would have liked to.
but we had to. Thanks, Graham. And then we had to. But if. In the past, you used to have to phone up your insurance company and say, I need a green card for my car insurance. And it's like, well, which countries are you going to? I'm going to France and Luxembourg. Right, okay. And then all of a sudden, someone decides in the car, let's go to Brussels. I can't, I've not got insurance because my green card, which takes up to 4 weeks to arrive. And I organised one when we were facing no-deal Brexit. Earlier this year under Theresa May.
Second time, third time?
No, the first time.
The first time. Okay.
And,
I love it when that comes around.
And it was like, can I have a green card? Well, where are you going? I said, well, France and Spain, might go into Portugal. And they said, well, you've got to tell us exactly when you're going and where you're going. Yeah. And it's like, how has that made life easier? All these European regulations, this, Gove was talking about, a bonfire of regulations and red tape. I've got even more in my life.
When I was in Uzbekistan, they ask you when you cross the border to list everything you come into the country with. You have to list it, and you have to have it with you when you leave.
Yeah.
And there was, you had to say how much money you had coming into the country. And I lost my little camera. Mm-hmm. And I was absolutely shitting bricks. I remember leaving the country, on my way to leave the country, I had spent the morning looking for a blue pen. I needed a blue pen because I only had a black pen, and the biro that I'd written the stuff I came in was blue. I needed a blue pen so I could just amend it a little bit so it said there wasn't, there was one camera, not two, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise they'll absolutely do me on the border, and I knew they were going to do me because I was couch surfing at the time, which is technically illegal in Uzbekistan.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they want you to stay in a hotel and get a little chitty. You get a little bit of paper to say you stayed in the hotel, and they have men they have officers on the underground in Tashkent, the capital, and they'll stop backpackers. They'll stop anyone who doesn't look particularly, Uzbeki, and say show me everywhere you've stayed, and you've got to have these little bits of paper to say I stayed in this hotel, You get 2 days grace, you get 48 hours grace, and after that, if you don't have these bits of paper,
You're
the
out.
country.
Yeah.
And there was a French couple who were staying in the same place as me, who got caught without the chitties and on the underground, and they were told, right, that's it, you got to leave. They were deported from the country. And these are like wealthy Westerners,
and
tourists who are spending money in the country.
That has serious ramifications for the rest of your life, because if you apply for an electronic travel authority to go to Australia or
I'll ask you,
the United
where
States,
have you been deported?
have you ever been deported from a country? Yeah. And if so, why?
Yeah.
And it's
that's affected me being arrested in Africa.
Technically, you have broken your visa restrictions in Uzbekistan.
Yeah.
You've been because they've deported you.
Yeah.
So they can refuse you an electronic travel authority.
Well, there's a problem with me because I've been in jail twice in Africa. Once in Cape Verde, once in Congo. I was not charged with anything.
But you're going straight now.
I was arrested.
But you're going straight now.
But I was arrested. I was held for 6 days.
Right.
I wasn't fed in Congo, but I don't like to mention it.
He was stealing wheel caps off. He was stealing the wheels off a car.
Yeah, imagine on your way to the border and you've got to leave the country at a certain time because that's what your visa says. You've got to say when you come in, you've got to say when you go out, and you can't get hold of a blue bloody pen. Every time the bus stops at a little restaurant, you run in and go, have you got any pens for sale? And they're like, yes. And they're all black.
Yeah.
And you're like, I need a blue pen. Seriously, I might end up in jail if I haven't got a blue biro. And you're sweating buckets.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I could get flown back. I'm trying to go to every country in the world. This is my 149th country.
Yeah.
My 149th country, the Odyssey Expedition. And I could have been flown home for the lack of a bloody biro.
Yeah.
So I could sign that thing to say to
now
medic because I had a little Sony camera that I had lost.
We drove here, and half of the boot is full of different coloured pens, just in case. He just doesn't even trust the Schengen zone,
One of the things I was just going to mention about the when you were saying about the 80s and 1985. When Schengen was agreed and this idea that we'll take down the borders, we'll have no one on the border posts. They still actually have people when you're on a coach going across Europe, which I've done quite a lot, because I'm a sadomasochist. We've been stopped going across the border and we've had our documents checked.
Yeah.
They have checked our documents. It's just not been on the border. But someone's got on board and said, once we got into Germany, and gone, can we just check your ID?
Yeah, I remember. I was staying in an air at somewhere in France on the way back from Spain once, and I stopped because I'd been driving for a few hours, so I stopped and I had a sleep, and then after some time, there's this knock on the window, and it's the French. Is it douane? I think they call them the douane or douane, which is the customs officers. It's a British registered car in an air, which is like a rest area. And, where are you going? So, back to the UK. And I got out of the car and it was like, well, it's a little bit cool. And he said, it's going to be colder in England. I said, well, yeah, I want to stay in France. But he said, I want to check your documents. And can we have a look in the boot of your car? And, So, yeah, I did. Don't know why. But another thing that's interesting about the EU is that the amount of people who say, and you hear them phoning up James O'Brien and say, well, we're taking back control of our laws. And we were on the ferry, and I thought, well, we're going to be driving for a while to get to this like Airbnb that Graham's organised in Luxembourg City. And I thought, I fancy a beer when we get there. So I got these beers, and we're coming into Calais, and there's a sign, and it says, 20 minutes out of Dover, you cannot buy alcohol. And I said, but it's okay coming into Calais? And he said, yes, the law is different in France. You can just buy it at the moment we dock if you want. So it's like, so the Britain's made its own law. So Britain's laws are sovereign. So that's a load of shit.
We'll secure our own borders, mate.
There's a
border, the UK border is effectively in France, because what we do is the French border is effectively at St Pancras Station and in Dover, because you have both
at Folkestone.
Yeah, you have both passport controls in the one place. A lot of the countries that I visited, I had this whole rigmarole every time I went to a new country, which is you had to check out of the country that you were leaving and make sure that you hadn't broken any laws or done anything wrong or got stamping your passport in the wrong place, or you hadn't staged your entry visa, you hadn't whatever.
Or you'd got an exit visa. Some places require an exit visa.
Yeah, so and a lot of places you've got to have every single stamp on the way out, so it's not just an exit stamp. You also have a customs stamp. You also have I had some places where I had like a vaccination stamp or something, or a stamp to say that I wasn't dying of bird flu or swine flu or something, or I didn't have Ebola. And then you go across no man's land, which in some places it was just a short walk. Some places it was like a bloody 3-mile trek through the desert.
Yeah.
Like, Mauritania is a really good example of that. Mauritania, the border with Western Sahara, which is de facto part of Morocco. I mean, it's like something out of Mad Max. It's all like sand dunes with all burnt out cars on it. You've got to take a vehicle. You can't cross that border
you physically
on foot.
can't walk.
There's a few borders like that in on the edge of Europe as well. The border between Macedonia and Romania, it's just coming out of the EU effectively, has a car bridge, and you have to go through in a car. So if you're on foot, you have to stop and put your thumb out and say, can you let me
have a lift
in your car? The same with the border post if you go due east, I think, of Vilnius in Lithuania. You're trying to get into Belarus. That border is a car-only border.
Vehicle
you cannot
only,
go across there on foot. You can't go across there on a bike.
That's bizarre, isn't it? It's interesting because we drove through France, drove straight off the ferry, and
let me tell you our borders.
we went.
I'm in the element here.
we drove off the ferry. There's all these new structures at Calais that I think is, if Brexit happens, particularly no deal Brexit, they're going to have French passport control back on French soil. Yeah. And which they do have at on the Brittany ferries routes. So French passport control is in France. But anyway, they've got all these new structures. Just drove straight through them, onto the auto route. Eventually got to the border of Luxembourg, and I said to Graham, right, we're driving along 130 kilometres an hour. I said, oh, there's the border of Luxembourg. And he said, where? And I said, look, these old huts here. And it looked completely derelict, didn't it? It's just like been left. But they've left it because they are allowed to reimpose border controls if there's a national emergency or if there's some issue. And I think
they're just left there just in case.
Just in case, because I think one of the countries had the G20 summit or something. I think it might have been the Netherlands or it might have been Luxembourg or one of them, and they reimposed border controls on the auto routes.
Because Russia were going to be there.
Anyway,
but I'm just to go off borders for a moment, because I can go on all day about borders if you'd like me to.
It was a long drive.
But one thing we talked about last night as well when we were driving was movies, and I want to point out one of the things in our Swiss cheese model is a movie called The Day After, which I just got up on my phone.
Oh,
it was a TV movie made in 1983, and it was screened privately to Ronald Reagan a month before its broadcast. And it was like When the Wind Blows. It was like Threads. It was there was a nuclear exchange, and it was survivors trying to survive the nuclear winter that resulted in it. And for Ronald Reagan, who had been very hawkish and because he was an actor, wasn't he? He was all-American hero, strolling down the beaches of Iwo Jima with his gold-handled revolver. It's just like that mentality, wasn't it? The American cowboy. He had been fronting up to the Russians and said, we're America, we're amazing, look, we got to the moon. And
we're going to have Star Wars.
Yes, and he was pursuing the Star Wars policy, which apparently infuriated George Lucas, who was the maker of the original Star Wars, because it was a strategic defence initiative.
It was,
And the idea was we were going to have these satellites around the world that could actually shoot missiles
ICBMs.
Out of the sky.
Yeah.
I don't even know if he had the technology to do that now. It was a bit fanciful, wasn't it? Probably using lasers. But he watched this film, and it really opened his eyes to the actual visceral horror of what the world would be like if we did have a nuclear exchange. And America's foreign policy changed as a direct result.
Of watching that film.
Mikhail Gorbachev becoming leader of the Soviet Union at a very opportune time, a crossover with the presidency of a guy who has sort of had his eyes open to the horrors of nuclear war. And Gorbachev is a very intelligent man, and he could see the way the world was going. He could see the way history was going, and he was right. He was absolutely right to bring in perestroika and glasnost. And it's such a shame now the way that Russia's gone, regressed back into space, like Britain has as well, and America.
And America, yeah. Because like you see these TV shows and documentaries, and they go on about these aircraft boneyards, and they say they've got like these fields full, or these deserts full of B-52 bombers and American warplanes. The reason they're not scrapped is not because they want to put them back into service. It's so that Russian satellites can photograph them to make sure that they're still out of service. Yeah. That's why they keep them. Yeah.
Wow.
It was part of the treaty agreement. It's like, well, you could be putting them into service, and they said, well, we'll tell you what, we'll leave them in the desert, where they won't corrode and fall apart and pollute things. A desert's a really good area to store an aircraft.
I feel like nostalgia is a particularly toxic human emotion. Is it an emotion, nostalgia, or how would you describe it?
Well, yeah, it's a nostalgic feeling, isn't it?
How would you describe it to a Vulcan? Mr. Spock, this is nostalgia.
Live long and prosper.
It is, do you know how many ears Mr. Spock's got? He's got 3. His left ear, his right ear, and his final frontier.
But these are the jokes, folks.
But yeah, I find myself getting nostalgic now, and I always try and fight against nostalgia. I don't want to be listening to the same music I listened to as a kid. I don't want to be watching the same films. I want to try stuff that's new and go new places that I haven't been to before. That's the pioneer spirit that I have, and I'm just born with it, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I am getting nostalgic for the days when the adults were in charge.
Well, yes, I agree.
The grown-ups, where have the grown-ups gone? Instead of where have all the cowboys gone, let's have a song, where have
the grown-ups gone?
It's just, we've got these grown-ups acting like bloody children. Yeah. Boris Johnson, Donald Trump being the best examples, but also leaders around the world, like, what's his guy, Duterte in the Philippines. An absolute child. He's a man with the brain of a vicious child. Toying with his victims. Bragging about murdering people.
And I was never a huge fan of Tony Blair, and I was never a huge fan of sort of John Major because of what the Tories did to the North in the 1980s under Thatcher. But now, and like Michael Heseltine, and I'm thinking,
back, all is forgiven.
Come back, yeah.
I disagree with you about so much stuff, but at least you're a grown-up.
Yeah, the statesman. There were statesmen, and you look at Boris Johnson, and he's got his foot up on the table when he's talking to the president of France, and stuff like that. So
anyway, right. So I think we need to wrap up now. But I've got my Euro yo-yo.
Well, and I was walking around the shop with him saying, it's...
he calls all Euros yo-yos.
I think I picked it up off an Irish mate of mine, but he's got his sticker.
Yeah. And I just want to say here today, from Schengen, the home of the Schengen Agreement, as the only person to have visited every country in the world without flying, and that means I crossed every single border touching the ground in some way, whether it was on a train or a bus or usually on foot. The last thing this world needs is more frickin' borders.
Exactly.
So thank you, Schengen.
Thank you, Schengen.
Thank you, the EU. And I keep saying this, if they do take us out the EU, we are going to fight to rejoin. Yeah. We are not going away. We're not going quietly into that good night. We're not going anywhere because we are European. Yeah. And so, guys, you're stuck with us. And on that bombshell, we'll see you next time.
Can I show them my pumpkin now?